Thank you all for coming tonight. My name's Bo Wright. I'm the kind of current executive director heading out at Kennett Collaborative. We're in the process of hiring a new executive director and have some really exciting candidates for that position. But I'm still in place at this time, and thank you for coming back to the speaker series. We took a break kind of over the summer months, but are excited to be back and talking about how we can make Kennett Square an even better place to live. So we're going to cover a lot of stuff tonight, and my job is just to be brief in kind of setting up some of the other speakers. And I want to sort of connect this speaker series and its broad arc, which is mostly focused on kind of the physical infrastructure of how we build our places. And we want to connect that with sort of the social infrastructure, how we build community that contributes to the physical world that we're creating. And so I'll be brief and then turn it over to some folks. But I want to start with this quote, which I think I've shared before. That's not the quote. Here are some of our participants later. We'll share this. I'll bring this back up towards the end. But after we're done here, we're going to have probably an hour up here where we're kind of have several speakers. And then afterwards, everyone here is going to have an opportunity to go down the stairs here. Again, we'll talk about this towards the end. And we have several kind of presenters at the end showing different projects that are various stages. Some are likely to happen, some are in different stages within the borough that we feel kind of contribute to the social infrastructure, creating a more equitable and inclusive community in Kennett Square. So we'll be able to highlight some of these at the end, and I'll bring that back up. Let's see if it goes to my quote now. Okay, this is the quote I wanted. I've shared this quote before by Winston Churchill that says, "We shape our buildings, and afterwards our buildings shape us." And I wanted to kind of, I'm in the pulpit, kind of dissect this. She would just dissect scripture, kind of breaking this apart into two sections. And first, starting with that latter part, our buildings shape us. So starting with our buildings shape us, I want to be brief here, but our buildings shape us, I think, in at least three ways. And I'm going to go through these really quickly. Our buildings and our places shape us. Go through this quickly because there's a lot that we have to cover. But I think it's important, we've done this How We Build Matters speakers series. We think that the built environment is incredibly important. It's something we should all care about. We're excited to see you all here. But I just want to go through three ways I think the built environment kind of shapes us really quickly. Each of these, as I said, we could spend an hour on, but I'll go through them quickly. Our places shape the trajectory of our lives. Our places shape the way we interact with others. And our places have the power to inspire or dead-end life within us. So let me just go through this kind of opportunity or trajectory first. This is a bunch of research done by a guy named Raj Chetty. It's probably like 8 to 10 years old at this point. Raj Chetty is involved with the Brookings Institute. He's a sociologist at Harvard. He has done probably the most extensive research, not sure how fuzzy this is, the most extensive research on essentially upward mobility. So upward mobility in two senses. One sense is kind of absolute upward mobility. Do people improve in lives? And the other is relative mobility. Do people improve relative to the folks around them? So what Raj Chetty and a team did, again, 8 to 10 years ago, they've continued a lot of this research, and I'll show just briefly some of the findings, is they broke down basically every zip code in America. And they broke out the folks that grew up there, and this is over a long period of time, into 5 quintiles of incomes. You have, the 80 to 100%, you have the lower, and they break it out into 5 quintiles. And what they're asking is, do people rise within, is there shifting within those quintiles? Does someone born wealthy within the 90th percentile, do they fall or do they stay in place? Does someone born at the 10th percentile, do they have the opportunity to make it to the 30th, 40th, 50th percentile? Is there movement there? That is opportunity. So they've broken down every zip code, and then they say, okay, let's look at the zip codes that have it and don't have it, and let's compare what's happening in those places and what's not happening. There's a variety of kind of factors that they found. I'm not going to go into all of them, but I will touch on some of the ways that the built environment touches on this. So these are specific findings from, again, the research of Raj Chetty. One of the key factors is what they call the neighborhood effects. And that is simply, this is all in research language, but they say places have a causal effect on upward mobility for a given person. So the place that you're born into, the zip code that you're born into, is a huge determinant of how much money you will make later in life, whether you have an opportunity, a shot at the American dream. It is maybe one of the biggest indicators is simply the place that the zip code that you were born into. Here's some other kind of breaking that down. They found that racial and income segregation is associated with less mobility. So to put it the opposite way, a neighborhood with a diversity of incomes is one of the leading indicators of upward mobility. So a community that doesn't just segregate, you live in the 400,000, homes, you live in the $425,000 homes. You live, as though a Mercedes and a Volvo could never interact together. That is how a lot of our built environment is kind of structured. But a community that actually has where folks from different incomes, a mixing of uses, a mixing of pricing points, a mixing of housing types, that is one of the leading indicators of whether or not a poor kid has a shot at the American dream. The second is that sprawling, auto-oriented places are associated with less mobility than walkable places. Again, they've looked at every zip code in America, the ones where they see upward mobility happening, that is one of the leading indicators. Again, this is not comprehensive. Again, it would take a long time to go through this, but these are some of the big factors. So our places, the physical places around us, have an impact on our lives. The types of walkable communities we built in America prior to World War II had a very strong correlation with what we might call the American dream. And many elements from our current built environment have a negative impact on the American dream. So, getting back to this quote by Winston Churchill, we shape our buildings, and afterwards our buildings shape us, so our places shape us. Let me just dive into another one. I think we're going through a national epidemic of loneliness. And our places shape the way we interact with others. This is just, if you just Google loneliness epidemic or anything, these are all articles within the past month that have come out. Your Google will be filled with just article after article after article showing that we are going through a loneliness epidemic. And a huge part of that is the way that our places shape the way that we interact with others. Let me just touch on a third one real quick. I think our places have the power to inspire or deaden life within us. Another way to say this is I think we need beauty in our daily lives. This is a quote by Christopher Alexander, which again, I'm not trying to prove this. I'm just trying to share an opinion of thoughts on this, that we need beauty in our lives. He says, the purpose of all architecture is to encourage and support life-giving activity, dreams and playfulness. But in recent decades, while our buildings are technically better, more sturdy, more waterproof, more energy efficient, they have also become progressively more sterile, rarely providing the kind of environment in which people are emotionally nourished, genuinely happy, and deeply contented. Everything we see in our surroundings raises our spirit a bit or lowers them a bit. I'm trying to make a building which is like a smile on a person's face. He goes on. There's a really interesting body of research done by a woman named Ann Sussman. It's in a book called Cognitive Architecture, where she kind of maps out brain waves as people interact with different architectural styles and in different places. I've shared some of this before, I think, in the first talk we had. But when they map people's brain waves walking through, kind of like a Walmart parking lot, it is essentially the same as you walking through the Sahara Desert with lions all around you. Like you are on extreme stress mode in there because you're always walking for that. Versus when you are walking, up and down State Street next to a body of walls next to you, you're at peace, you're calm. That's what your brain waves are telling you. So all of this is simply to say our places shape us. But one of the things we want to talk about tonight is our places shape us, but the first part of that quote by Winston Churchill, we shape our places. So our places shape us, but we shape our places. There's this quote by Jane Jacobs where she says, cities have the capability of providing something for everybody only because and only when they are created by everybody. So this latter part of how we shape our places, how we collectively shape our places, is what we want to dive into tonight. Our places shape us, we shape our places. So the question is, what kind of places do we collectively want? So we're going to dive into that tonight, and I am going to turn it over to Katie from Penn Praxis to share some of her thoughts. Mic is
on. Great. Are our slides next to this? Great, thank you. Everyone, it's a pleasure to meet you. My name is Katie Levesque. I'm a project manager with Penn Praxis, and I'm joined this evening by my colleague Alexandra, who you'll hear from in a moment. So we're just here to talk to you a little bit more about the work that we've been doing with Square Roots Collective on the introduction that Bo gave about how not only do our places shape us, but how important it is to make sure that we all are participating in shaping our places as well. So very quickly, Penn Praxis is the Center for Research Engagement and Social Impact at the University of Pennsylvania School of Design. We specialize in design, planning, and preservation projects that prioritize community engagement, innovative thinking, and actively advocate for environmental and social change. So I know that kind of sounds like a lot of buzzwords, but what it really boils down to is that we understand the power that our built environment holds on all of us, and we truly believe that the everyday people who live, work, and play in any space really should have the ability to shape their environments, should have the agency to shape those environments because they do have such a big impact on each other and themselves. So they should have a say in what happens and should be able to advocate for their own needs and desires, right? And so this philosophy predicates that before we can make any physical interventions, which could be things like housing or public infrastructure and assets, trails, the interpretation of heritage and culture in a space, before we do any of that kind of physical infrastructure work that makes our space, we really need to build diverse capacity and power within the, excuse me, sorry, I'm on a little COVID recovery, so I hope you guys are hearing me all right. We need to really we need to build the diverse capacity and power within the community to shape our social infrastructure, to put our social infrastructure and our people first. And by taking that time and energy to build our social infrastructure, to recognize that diversity is really important, to recognize that diverse experiences have different levels of expertise that contribute meaningfully to our built environment, then we're going to be in a really good place to make that impactful investment in our physical environment. So we have to start with that social capacity first. And so with that in mind, we began a partnership with Square Roots Collective to develop new, inclusive, and ultimately actionable ways to engage the wider Kennett community and really strengthen Kennett's social infrastructure. And we did this work collectively with Square Roots Collective because we both understood that to see this inclusive community reflected in the physical fabric of Kennett, there were some changes that needed to happen in the social fabric. If you guys have been participating within the Kennett community for years now, I'm sure it's nothing new to hear that there is not always the best level of engagement across different diverse sections of Kennett. So we needed to find ways to bring new perspectives in, to really encourage and support these new perspectives, to claim some real ownership, right? So to move beyond kind of a thank you for taking our survey, extractive level of engagement, and really start shifting and sharing power amongst everyone who lives within the community to see that real impactful change. So you maybe have seen us around town over the past year. We've been working with SRC on a number of different events, all in service of this one goal, strengthening Kennett's social infrastructure. And what that's looked like, sorry, this is much smaller than I expected it to be, but we started with a bunch of stakeholder engagement listening sessions, basically just to understand what was the status quo, what's happening in Kennett, where can we have actual impact quickly and meaningfully. We then took some time to digest all of that and come back to the community with a list of priorities and actionable, that's a key word here, things that we could do in 1 year to have an impact to kind of shift the status quo of the social infrastructure of Kennett. We then came back and did these workshops to say, here are these priorities that we have some ideas might be helpful or interesting in Kennett. What do you think, you guys as the people who live and work in Kennett, might be a good thing to try? And from that, we settled on 3 projects to try over this last year. And so those are the 3 at the bottom, but what we're here to talk about today specifically is our Emerging Leaders program. And so the Emerging Leaders Program is a leadership development program that was designed around these specific goals. To understand the variety of ways to be involved in the Kennett community, to make connections and opportunities across the growing network of leaders, to cultivate confidence and know-how, and to find and redefine technical skills for individual leadership and community development. And so why did we kind of settle on this Emerging Leaders Program? And this was something that not only did we come up with as an idea, us with Square Roots Collective, but the greater Kennett community supported and thought it would be really useful. Well, we knew that community efforts were strong in Kennett, but they were disconnected. So there was no shortage of amazing people who wanted to come sit at the table, but there was a lot of people who weren't really sure if they were invited to be there, how to come there, how to share their ideas and their opinions. So we needed kind of an area to convene everyone together, really bring strength and community and connection between each other, and then also bring some mentorship in and skills in so people understood who to turn to help, who to ask for advice, how to not be so afraid in a public meeting to stand up and speak their mind. So we thought this leadership development program would be a good way to start doing that. And then also to specifically bring in some more diverse voices, right? So not always maliciously, but just out of habit, there tends to be the same people making the decisions in a town over and over and over again. So if we could support and bring in new leaders to come speak their own experiences and expertise as community members, we could start to shift who was taking responsibility for shaping our built environment together. Now I'm going to pass it over to Alexandra to speak a little bit more about the specific program that we developed.
Hello. I'll keep it super quick, but I was involved in coordinating and facilitating the leadership program, so I'm excited to see all your beautiful faces and talk a little bit about the program. So in terms of participants, when it became time to find our first cohort for this, what we were thinking of as a pilot initiative, we wanted to keep it pretty small, pretty intimate, so that we could stay adaptable as the program moved on and then adapt it for hopefully future years, but also to just make sure that people could develop closer relationships and get to know one another. We were also looking to find some people who are already familiar with the Kennett community, already have some sort of investment in it, but then who wanted to benefit from maybe some stronger connections and some exposure to other initiatives and leaders. And we made this a really open application process. Our outreach ranged from emails to the Penn Praxis Project and SRC Partnership steering committee and stakeholder list. We also put some bilingual social media posts out there, so we tried to cast as wide of a net as we possibly could have. And we ended up with really great response rates, a lot of excitement about this type of opportunity. And we ended up with this insanely incredible group here. I wanted to take a moment and have the Emerging Leader Fellows stand up who are here tonight to be recognized for their commitment to the community. Yes, photo time. We love it. Cool. We love a photo op. But yeah, I can speak for Penn Praxis that it was just an amazing experience to work with these individuals. We're so inspired by you and proud of you. So in terms of structuring the sessions, we decided to have 2 facilitators for each of the 4 sessions that took place between April and June. We tried to have one local facilitator to, bring that local perspective and speak to the Kennett experience, and also help build more relationships in the community. But then we also tried to bring in like an outsider, someone with more of an outside perspective who might not be from the region. We ended up bringing people from Washington, D.C., from Reading, Pennsylvania, and also even a virtual appearance from the Eastern Coachella Valley outside of Los Angeles. And we focused on those areas outside of Pennsylvania because they actually have some social and cultural dynamics that are really similar to Kennett, so they're experiencing some of the same issues. Next slide. So for the first session, we asked fellows to really look inward and really suss out what is their personal leadership style and what are the strengths and challenges that come with that, and also how to build teams around those leadership strengths. Our guest facilitators did an amazing job. One of them was Leon Spencer, who you're probably all familiar with, and then another from the 11th Street Bridge Project in Washington, D.C. They did an incredible job just starting really strong and just really setting the right tone to create a safe space for people to feel included, feel engaged, and just comfortable participating and sharing their perspective. Session 2 took a deep dive into power dynamics and how they affect access to leadership and also decision-making when you're at that table. The guest facilitator from Barrio Alegria in Reading, Pennsylvania, he actually brought this approach that's called Theater of the Oppressed, which was a super interesting exercise. Essentially, fellows reenacted situations in which the power dynamics were unequal, or they felt like they weren't able to express themselves adequately or fairly, and then through this reenactment, essentially rewrote the ending of the story to equalize those power dynamics. So it was just a really cool exercise to go through. Session 3 focused more on engaging with one another, community building, placemaking, and also engaging with youth so that people can start building those self-confidence and comfort being a leader from an early age. Fellows also did some project planning exercises to take their community-oriented ideas and make them actionable, and with the help of, or the support of the Penn Praxis team and Square Roots team. And then session 4 brought everybody outside to start talking about everything that they learned and all of these dynamics, but out in the community. So looking at spaces and thinking about what makes a genuinely safe or welcoming space. And how to promote that for one another, especially to create safe spaces for people who come from different backgrounds and have different perceptions of what belonging means. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our Emerging Leaders panel. Or am I passing it to Christina? Or Christina.
Hi, everybody. My name is Christina Norland. I'm not going to do very much talking today at all. My goal here is to facilitate a conversation with 3 of the leaders that we have that have taken the Emerging Leaders Fellowship program, and also who really just have done such amazing things for the community already, and I'm really excited to see what the future holds for each of them. So let me introduce them to you. We'll start over here with Elidette Navarro. She is Vice President and Assistant Director of Kennett Multimedia, which is a local multimedia company that is committed to providing valuable, objective information to the Spanish-speaking community in the greater Kennett area. Kennett Multimedia also seeks to bridge the gap between the Spanish-speaking and English-speaking parts of our community in the hope of creating a more inclusive, educated, and strong community. Elidette is also a bilingual credit assistance specialist in corporate America and is a graduate of Oxford Area High School, and she has lived in the Kennett community for 17 years. Mayra Castillo is the Vice President of Casa Guanajuato, Kennett Square, which seeks to celebrate and promote the richness of Mexican, Latin, and South American culture and art through community events and programming. Mayra is also the coordinator of student diversity and inclusion at Cecil College. She has lived in the Kennett area on and off for 29 years and is a graduate of Avon Grove High School. And last but not least, we have Lee Sawson, who is a certified public accountant, definitely much better at math than I am, and the Associate Director of Investments and Taxation at Longwood Gardens. Lee is a trustee and the treasurer of the Kennett Library. He is also an active member of the planning committee for Kennett Collaborative's Brewfest and Winterfest events. And he has lived in the Kennett area for 7 years and a graduate of Newark High School in Delaware. So thank you guys for being here with us tonight. We're really excited to hear from you. And I just I want to say, like, I had such an amazing experience being part of this program and watching you guys, because I learned so much from each of you and also others who are in this program. So I hope you can share some of that with our group here tonight. So maybe we could start with Ellie. Can you share a little bit about your story and about the impact that this program had on you as a leader?
Absolutely. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for having me, for having us. And thank you for being here, because being here and us sitting here in front of you, the community, is a proof that you care and that we also matter. So a little bit about me. I was born and raised in the state of Guerrero in Mexico until my 14th year. At the time, my parents made the decision for us, for me and for my brothers, to move to the US. And I will never forget that day. It was September 1st, 2002. At that time, I was about to turn 15, November. So, of course, I did not get to have a quinceañera party, that big celebration and tradition there is for us. And until this day, that's why I cry every time I see a quinceañera. But we moved to Pennsylvania to join my father, who at the time was already working he had many years working already in the fields for the mushroom fields in Kennett Square. For me, my arrival, it was very disorienting. My very first day in school, of course. Shocking, traumatizing. Imagine yourself, put yourself a little bit in my shoes at the time, not knowing the language, not being able to communicate with the world. So everything was very difficult, but I also learned a lot. And then this program was actually the welcome experience for me. It was that welcome to the country after all these years, after 20 years to being in the US. It was that hug that you always expect to receive when you get into a new place. This program, the very first day, it was definitely a safe environment for me, where I could bring my whole self, where I was not afraid to speak up, where I was not afraid of being judged. They even had Mexican bread and coffee every morning for us. Those little mini conchas, my favorite ones. So those little things made the difference, because I was like, okay, they thought about us, right? So I did not want the program to end. I was always looking forward to the next session. So thank you for that.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing your story with us and being vulnerable here. Myra, I imagine that some of what Ellie speaks resonates with you. Can you talk about some of the key moments in the program that really hit home for you?
So I've been here a little bit longer than Ellie has, for almost 30 years. And at one point I remember thinking, I came when I was 12, and then when I hit 24, 25, I thought, oh, I've lived half my life here and half my life in Mexico. I won't tell you my age now, but you can tell based on my gray hairs that I've grown a little bit older as the years go by. And 30 years next year, midsummer. And up until last year, we still had discussions in Casa Guanajuato where we said, as members, where we felt like we didn't belong. It was a sense of non-belonging. But in Spanish, there's a saying, no soy ni de aquí ni de allá. It's from an old movie from, I don't know, the 1990s, where an Indian Mexican came to the United States, and after coming here and then going back home, she felt like she wasn't accepted here, so she didn't belong here, and then she went back to Mexico, and in Mexico she felt out of place once she got back. And for us, that felt like the same experience, where here, because of the color of our skin, Especially through the pandemic, there were certain things that I noticed in our community that had been a need the whole time, but really were open during the pandemic. And so with Casa Guanajuato, we try to make sure that we went back to the education process for our kids and that our kids had an education, that the kids could have access to the internet, that the kids had a computer at home so that they could have a better future and a better life. So I felt because of the color of my skin, I didn't belong here. But then when I go back to Mexico, I feel like I'm a tourist there now. We're called norteños, northerners, when we go back, because we speak a funny Spanish. It's not completely accurate. We don't know everything about Mexico and our own traditions and our own culture, because over the last 30 years, we've had to adjust to living here, and so we've lost part of the connection to Mexico. So for a long time, I felt like it didn't belong here nor there. And it wasn't until one of the sessions with Daniel from Barrio Alegría from Reading, we did an exercise with him. It was the one where we sat down and we, through theater, we created this piece where in the end, we were given the power to be ourselves and to really realize who we were and where we were. And then there were a few of us who said the same thing, like we felt like we didn't belong here, but we also didn't belong in Mexico. And he gathered us together in a circle, all of us. And even people who are Americans, white Americans, who have said, well, I wasn't born in Kennett, I'm not from Kennett, so I also feel like I'm not from here, but I'm also not from the place where I was born, even within the United States. And so he gathered us together in the circle and he said, you have to say it and you really have to believe it. I belong. I belong here. I belong here. And you had to say it to the point where you really believed it. Like there was one person, and I'm not gonna call him out, but they said it and he was like, do you really believe that? And then that person was like, no, it wasn't strong enough. Like you have to say it like you really believe it. I belong here. And to me, that was the moment where now anywhere I go, I say I belong here. Because I have been to many places, like even here, there's a few of us who are Hispanic, Mexican, majority white, but based on my own experiences growing up as a leader and as an educator and now in an inclusivity role, I go to conferences and I still go to places where I'm the only Latina in the room. There may be other minorities, but I'm the only Latina in the room. And I go and I walk in and I say, I belong here. Wherever I'm stepping, I belong here. And I go back to Mexico and I say the same thing, I belong here. So it was a sense of belonging for me.
Thank you for sharing that with us. And, as part of this community, because you belong here, what do you desire to see in Kennett? And how do you see progress to date in terms of creating a sense of community and belonging for everyone who calls this place home?
Certainly over the last 30 years, I have seen progress. Slowly, steady, but I have to remember that change does take time. Over the last 30 years, I do remember when I first came in, I was one of 10 who graduated from my high school in 1999. And then as soon as I left, there were more, and same in Kennett, there were more and more students who were graduating high school. I was one of the first ones in the community to go to college. And after me, there were even more and more students who were going on to college. There's a lawyer who is somebody who was born in Mexico, came as a young child, was part of my dance group when I was in the dance group, and she's a local lawyer now, bilingual local lawyer, serving the same community that she belongs to. Coming in and seeing one or two grocery stores, Mexican grocery stores, to more grocery stores everywhere, to having more ice cream places where we can go and get our favorite ice cream. I used to remember the first few years when I was here dreaming of going back to my hometown and eating an ice cream. And I stopped having dreams like that after I realized that I could get just as good as ice cream here. Now, of course, it's always more delicious when I go have it in Mexico, but I can get just as delicious ice cream here. I don't have to go to travel to Mexico to get it. More people in business, more entrepreneurs growing their own business. There's this young man who owns La Bamba in Kennett, an ice cream place, an ice cream shop. And I see him growing as an entrepreneur, growing his business. He owns a variety of homes that now he rents to other people in the community. I see growth and I see potential because I do feel like we're being included a little bit more each time. And every time that we're given the opportunity to have a seat at the table like we were given with this program, we do get to meet new people, and people get to hear us, and people give us other opportunities. I was just at a meeting earlier through Zoom from 4 to 5 with Bo and other individuals, in another meeting for attainable housing. And that to me is huge. I've been saying it, I said it through the pandemic, and I've been saying it, you know, I'm familiar with redlining because of the type of work that I do, and I would hate to see more houses that are over $500,000, single homes where people get to live there. And I also see in Avondale an apartment building that continues to flood. I see people who live, families, entire families in one home. Sometimes you have 2, 3 families, single men living in one home because they cannot afford one single home. But being part of this meeting, giving me the voice to say those things, to say, yes, it's still happening. Let's not let it happen again. Let's not repeat history. It happened before. Let's not let it happen again. So I feel really good. I feel like there is progress, there is change. I know it'll take time, but 30 years have flown by, and I finally get to a point where I say I belong, and I can create changes, and I can make changes, and hopefully those changes will affect my children and my grandchildren one day. You know, it's like that saying, you plant a tree not because you think that you are going to benefit from its shade, but that hopefully your children and your grandchildren will benefit from that shade from that tree. So I see the potential.
Thank you. And Lee, I'll get to you in a second, but Ellie, how do you think, I think we heard a little bit about the progress that Myra spoke about, but how do you think that we can bridge some of the gaps that exist between us in order to work better together?
Simple. Take the time to listen to our stories, our backgrounds. Breaking the barriers, because that day, the very first day that we had the session, many barriers were broken. I remember that exercise. That definitely changed my life. And I learned a lot also because the facilitator said, you're gonna sit down, you won't say a word, just listen. Listen to that person's story. And then take turns, that other person will be listening to your story. So really, we didn't have much to say. Sometimes we even make like sign language. And you were able to communicate and to understand the feelings. And then we realized that we were humans. It didn't matter the job title. It didn't matter what you do in life. It didn't matter the color of your skin. We recognize ourselves as human beings. And that was the biggest barrier that we broke that day. And that's why I say I finally felt safe in a safe environment. I was like, okay, I can talk about me. I can show vulnerability and not being judged. This person is understanding me. So I think the very first step is also identifies ourselves. What are our barriers? What's keeping me or stopping me to move forward to the next step, to get to know this person? Share, Imagine yourself if you are in a desert and you only have one drink, and I said, Myra, okay. What would that mean to you, right? You even understand sign language. That you don't need sometimes to speak the language, right? It's very uncomfortable, yes, but how about we both learn each other? How about we start from there? And to try to understand our stories and just seeing us as human beings. I actually have one of my favorite quotes that I would like to share with everyone. It's from a Canadian author and poet teacher that says, I hope that people will finally come to realize that there is only one race, the human race, and that we are all members of it.
So Lee, now you have to follow all that up. No, but can you, I mean, I think it was, part of what was so powerful about this program was bringing people together from such different backgrounds, right, and getting to know each other. Can you talk a little bit about what your biggest takeaway was from the program?
Yeah, I think for me, in a word, the program was motivating. I mean, I'm surrounded by my peers who care about where they live, who are just as busy as me, you know, if not more so. And it was exciting. So I'll admit I was a little nervous in the beginning, not knowing exactly what to expect. And, you know, you're in a room full of strangers and being asked to open up. And someone who kind of leans towards maybe being an introvert, you know, that was tough in the beginning. But I surprised myself at how quickly, you know, we all got comfortable with each other. And even after the first session, we really got to know each other. And it felt good. You know, I realized I need to put myself out there a little bit more often and kind of, open myself up to other perspectives. I think part of the real value here was every single one of us, I think, looks at community and our role in community slightly different, and that was pretty special.
So, you know, I think a lot of times, you know, people feel like maybe, like, what can I really do, right, to, like, impact the future of my community? What do you say now to people who feel like, I really can't shape the future here? You know, things are just going to happen without me. How do you respond to that after this experience?
So I think getting involved means a lot of different things. Volunteering for a nonprofit is a way of getting involved. But I think it can also mean just something much less formal than joining a board or a committee. I think it could just be showing up to events like this, talking to or introducing yourself to someone you've never met before, and sharing, you know, an idea about a way to make Kennett better, a way to preserve what's great in Kennett now. That's involvement, and I think that spreads and makes everyone even better members of the community. But then, you know, the question on my mind next is then, when and where are we supposed to, you know, exchange ideas and rub shoulders with one another, build new relationships? I think the meeting we're in right now is a huge win and an opportunity. But I think it's up to us to create even more activities. I'll give a shout out to the organizers of Kennett Run Club. And they meet every Thursday at 6:30, so no run club for me tonight. But it's not a nonprofit, it's not a formal organization, just a friendly group of runners and walkers. And this is just an example, but that's a low stress, informal opportunity to get together as a community. And maybe running is not your thing, which is fine. But what if we had like a sewing club or a Dungeons and Dragons club where anyone and everyone is invited? All you have to do is show up, be yourself. There's very little to no cost. It's just a way to, you know, those are opportunities to meet new folks and get involved and do something that you enjoy. So that's community to me. But admittedly, it can be tough to act on some of those things. So I think we should challenge ourselves to make it easy to discuss new ideas and create venues for those discussions. Whether you're moving here from Delaware or from a different country, where's your first stop? And you know, where's an easy opportunity to learn and be together? These are questions, and you know, I have some of my own ideas on the answers, but it's up to all of us, and it's not just Borough Council or the leaders of the nonprofits. I think it's everyone here. And just to clarify, you know, I don't want to minimize all of the great things that have happened in this town. You know, I know Bo and his team, Kennett Collaborative, have achieved a lot. I mean, between CACs and the garage and the library, I mean, I couldn't possibly list them all, but we have a lot of nonprofits and for-profit business partners who do a lot of good for the town. And of course, there's room for improvement and you know, always to do the best we can. But in addition to getting better, I think, particularly as more development comes to town, it's also preserving the good that's already in place. So knowing what forward progress and preservation looks like for everyone, I think means talking about it with people you know and are comfortable with, and with strangers who also happen to be passionate about where they live, but also probably have a different perspective. And I think that's what I'm motivated to now encourage.
No, thank you. So I know that we want to open it up to questions from the audience here, so I'll turn it over to Bo.
That's it. Can we give them a round of applause for these panelists? So yeah, we'd love to just take maybe 3 to 4 questions, if anyone has any, for anyone up here, any of the panelists. Any questions? Is it to Elideth? Is that who you're asking the question to, Ellie?
The book? No. No, I would love that. That was true.
We'll have to check it out. Sounds like last name
Yes.
is Navarro on it, so that.
There are a couple of books that I would recommend. Well, but one's a book that I would recommend that does talk about the community. That was from 1994. It was edited by Mark Lyons, called Mirrors and Windows. Yeah, Mirrors and Windows, Espejos y Ventanas. That's a bilingual book of stories of 3 generations that came to the United States and worked in the mushroom industry. It included stories of the group Danza de Nochli, Father Frank, Sister Jane, who were some of the local organizers that helped the community when they first came into the Kennett area. So that's one. And then, of course, now there's the play by People's Light called Mushroom, which has been worked over the last 10 years, and it is a story about the mushroom industry in Kennett. So it's being run through People's Light in Malvern, Pennsylvania, and it's called Mushroom. Tickets are on sale now. And I only know because they're collaborating with us in Casa Guanajuato, so that people from the Hispanic community attend, obviously, because it is a story to honor the mushroom workers. But it does, tell the story of the mushroom industry here in the Kennett area.
Go ahead.
Yeah, and I
Great.
know that they're also coming down to the Avondale Garage, so they're going to be having a screening there for some of the families, but I'm sure if you wanted to go and see it with the families, that's another way to do it as well.
I have two questions, I guess. For Penn Praxis, you mentioned this is the Emerging Leaders Program. What were the other 2 programs of the 3? It was a little hard to read the green there. And my question to the panel is, obviously this is a wonderful area compared to other places, but human trafficking happens everywhere. I was wondering if you have seen any human trafficking or any thoughts about that here, since it is a migrant community.
Start really quick. So the focus was on this space, that's why we just spent the time to go into it. But if you saw us at a number of different events, mostly this summer, we were doing survey to kind of just get a baseline of information
the question. While it is, we don't have any official records that we are aware of human trafficking. We know that with the folks that came from Guatemala in the recent years, there has been women that have been traveling by themselves, and there are young women who are traveling with a parent or a relative, usually a man. And we don't know if that is the case of human trafficking, of men trafficking young women, or that once they get here, we don't know if they're being prostituted. But there has been some, hush hush about whether that's a possibility within.
In this area.
Yes, in this area, in the Kennett area, and then potentially moving up towards Philadelphia, towards the New York area. But again, no official record. It's just some of the things that we hear from talking to the community and the potential of that, because we do have young women, young Guatemalan women who don't have a parent, who are not with an official parent. They may be with a relative, but we don't know who that relative may be.
Richard, go ahead.
Yeah, hi, Richard Gaw, Chester County Press. Obviously, the principles of this Emerging Leaders Program are successful, but are they the start of further tendrils, Christina and others, that could bring the same kind of conversation into our school systems? If not, is that a possibility?
Thanks, Richard. I think that this, as Katie talked about, is really the pilot program of how can we begin to foster some of these conversations and raise people up within the community who are clearly doing, as you heard today, some really amazing things and have had some amazing life experiences. And I think part of the reason why we wanted to bring this to everyone today is to think about and kind of begin to have conversations together as to where can we take this next? What are the ways that each of us, whether it is to have, this could be the inaugural class of this pilot program, and obviously, amazing alumni of this program to start, but where do we go from here? We can have more emerging leader programs, but we could also, think about the school system and how can we collaborate in that way. Think about other nonprofits or for-profits in the area. Oftentimes, are always looking for board seats, for example, for people to be on boards. We have some amazing members of the community here who I'm sure don't want me to volunteer more of their time, but how can we raise people up into those roles? So I think really my answer to your question, Richard, is that we hope this begins to spur a lot more conversation about how we can bring different voices into the room and kind of empower everyone to feel like they are leaders and contributors to the future of Kennett.
I think there's one other question back there. Do you still have a question? Okay.
Sure.
Go ahead.
To the panel, with the rising costs of home ownership within the borough and then the increased development pressure mostly outside the borough but inside the borough, how do you think that's going to impact your efforts going forward in trying to integrate the community even further?
Again, I talked about how I'm part of this new committee for affordable housing, and it's a new beginning for this because we do know that it is an issue, and so again we know it's going to take time, but we are committed community members who want to make sure that our voices are heard, and we have members from the community, we have members that have some sort of background in home ownership, in building in the community. So we know that that's coming up, but we're trying our best to make sure that our voices are continued to be heard so that it doesn't happen. And then I wanted to add on to what Christina said, and your question was the garage, the Kennett Garage and the Avondale Garage is really doing a really wonderful job of creating leaders. They work with the school districts, with Kennett and Avon Grove school districts. The young woman who I spoke about, who is a bilingual lawyer, Nancy Ayon, is a a graduate of the Garage. I know of another young woman who is a DACA recipient. She is undocumented, and she is a paralegal in Westchester, and she's also part of the board at the Garage. She's also an alumni of the Garage. So I consider them to be leaders, and I consider the Garage to be building leaders. So there is some work already being done in the school districts as well. And so what I hope that with this program, what they've done is, again, given us a chance to say, I do have a voice, and I'm going to use my voice where I can be heard so that I can make an impact wherever I go, and with other organizations that are already making an impact, to make sure that we collaborate with each other so that that impact continues to grow.
Last question is yours, Andy.
Two items. One, I would like to encourage you folks and everybody else in the audience that all of the public meetings in the borough, whether it be Borough Council, Planning Commission, the HAR, Finance Committee, all health and safety, all of those are open public meetings. And the best way to get to know what's going on in town is to go to those meetings. And I hope that I'm on a couple of those items. I hope to see all of you there at some future meeting. The second thing I wanted to ask the panel, because some of you have been here decades, has the level of discrimination changed in your mind from when you first arrived to now, because of the more almost equal population of Latino and non-Latino folks in the borough? Has your acceptance grown over the years as the population has grown, or is it still a problem?
I wouldn't say discrimination, but I personally can share that back in the day when I started in high school, there was literally no guidance, or maybe it was and I didn't know and I didn't understand, right? But I see now a lot of more opportunities, and they are being created, the same community, and also every one of you, because you are allowing us also to learn from you. And that creates a lot of opportunities. So I've seen a lot of change. I've seen that our community does feel more comfortable and more safe. And now they come up to us and they see a lot of faces, similar faces, or the same color of skin, that they feel comfortable to come to us and ask questions and ask for guidance and ask for help. So I wouldn't say that this discrimination, but I would say that they do feel more safe and there are more opportunities. And we continue to grow in that. And then we also would like to continue to learn from you as well, because we want to learn also from your culture, from your stories, from everything, so we can be one.
She's a little bit more positive than I am. Certainly over the last few years, since 2016, it's been more open, more overt, the racism and the discrimination. And we have to talk about individual discrimination from individual people, but we also have to talk about the type of discrimination that you don't see, but you know it's there. Things like immigration policies that affect who can get papers and who can't, who's been here for decades and still is undocumented, those that received DACA and then it was canceled and then they can't get it again. And that creates barriers for people, that creates issues of mental health, of feeling like they don't belong, that they're not good enough. You know, she said we're all human beings. Yes, we're all human beings. It's all one race. It's all one human race. But not having that one piece of paper that says that you can officially live in this country, that you can officially work in this country, that you can officially drive, that creates a sense of non-belonging and being scared and being afraid and having to continue to hide and having to play the system. So while in some cases it's overt, in some cases it's more hidden, it just depends on how you see it and how you perceive it. And I think because within my job and within my work as coordinator of student diversity and inclusion, I see it more than probably other people can because of what I do.
So all these panelists will be available downstairs afterwards. We're going to go ahead and move to that portion. They're available, and there is wine, so you can talk with them. I want to kind of help us transition to that, and I think this last conversation is helpful. I've been kind of in this community and with Kennett Collaborative for almost 3 years now, and there have been a lot of conversations. I lost track of like the committees that I'm on about building a more equitable and inclusive community. It's an amazing place to live and be involved in here in Kennett Square because there is so much passion for building a more inclusive community. It really is amazing. I think one of the things that I've noticed is that because there's such angst to build a more inclusive community, and because doing that work is often so difficult, to be just totally frank, it is difficult, there ends up being a lot of kind of angst and frustration, and I think sometimes that can turn into blame of, why aren't you doing more? Why isn't this organization doing more? Why isn't this organization doing more? So what we wanted to do this evening was just have an opportunity to show a few projects that are coming, in the borough, and show the ways that they are trying to build a more inclusive community in different ways. None of these projects are perfect. None of these are going to solve, any of these issues entirely, but they each are well-intentioned projects, that are trying to help move the community forward to being a more equitable and inclusive community. So I'm just going to highlight these, and again, there's kind of a science fair style display downstairs. You go out these doors, there's stairs down there. You can't get lost, I don't think, going down there straight ahead. So the projects we want to share is the Red Clay Trail and Park by Kennett Trails Alliance. They're going to be showing kind of their inclusive process for community input on a public space that's intended for all. It's right here in the borough. You'll see some images and learn more about that project. Be able to talk to Christina Norland more about that. The Kennett Library, if you've missed the library, you're blind here. It's going up. It's a beautiful building that's coming up. We're going to be able to hear from, I think, several folks from the library about some of the programming that they have intended that reaches the entire community, and really how the library is intended as a space for the whole community. It's more than just a library is kind of one of the phrases they've used. And so it's going to have a lot of programming that's intended for the whole community. You can learn more about that. We're going to learn a CAPA, the Kennett Area Parks Authority, is downstairs, showing some of the future plans for Anson B. Nixon Park, which already, if you go there, my friend Jeff and I will often meet up midday and take walks there, and you'll see a diversity of people at some of the picnic tables there. It's a beautiful space. It's for the whole community, and some of the future plans that CAPA has planned for that space that would make it more intentional for the whole community. More programs for the whole community, so you can learn more about that. We have our Kennett Square Farmers Market. Roz Fenton is going to be down there. I think she has the best display. Don't let her know that, but I think she has the best display. The Kennett Square Farmers Market is a great program, happens every Friday, year-round. It's at the Creamery. Roz has been very intentional in trying to kind of make it more inclusive and intentionally geared towards the whole community. I think, no secret, historically farmers markets have tended to be used by the kind of upper middle class in a community. Roz has been very intentional, has a huge heart for making sure that the farmers market is for the whole community through some different programs. She's going to share some of the ways that it already does that and some of her ideas for how it could become a more inclusive space. And then the last one is a proposed development project at 600 South Broad that would include a range of housing options, kind of this attainable housing that was brought up at various price points, and kind of community-oriented shops and spaces, kind of plazas and some of these different places. So again, you can learn more about all of those. It's science fair style. Just walk around, find the person that's in charge there, and talk to them. Let's give another round of applause for our panelists. And final thing I just want to say before we conclude is thanking Square Roots Collective for sponsoring tonight. They're the organization that sponsored and supported the Penn Praxis program, the fellowship program, supported all of these fellows, and they supported this program as well tonight. So thank you to Square Roots Collective. Well, I hope to see you all downstairs, and there's wine, so please join us. It's a big